Emily had always been the quiet, dependable presence at the advertising firm, the one people noticed only when something went wrong or when she quietly delivered flawless work, and she liked it that way. She enjoyed the rhythm of her days, the hum of keyboards, the soft buzz of conversations, the smell of fresh coffee in the mornings, and the small victories that came when a project went smoothly. But that morning, the air felt different, electric in a way she could almost feel in her chest as she organized her desk, straightened her papers, and noticed the sunlight slanting through the blinds, casting long lines across the floor, because there had been a message waiting in her inbox, brief and to the point, that made her stomach flutter and her mind race. Her young boss, Daniel, had asked to see her in his office, and though she tried to tell herself it was probably about a project or some routine review, a strange nervous energy settled over her, making her fingers tap impatiently against the keyboard, making her palms sweat as she imagined all the possibilities, and she felt her pulse quicken as she walked down the polished hallway, the sound of her shoes clicking against the floor echoing slightly in the quiet office, and she couldn't help but notice Daniel through the glass walls of his office, standing near the window with his back to her, shoulders slightly hunched in a way that made him seem younger, more vulnerable than she had ever noticed before, and her mind began to wander, to fill in blanks she didn't even know were there, thinking about the subtle moments over the past months, the way he had smiled at her in meetings, the way his voice had lingered slightly longer than professional decorum required when he praised her ideas, and she felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth as she took a deep breath and knocked lightly on the door, hearing the quiet voice that said come in and stepping through into a space that suddenly felt charged, intimate despite its professional trappings, with sunlight warming the corners of the room, the soft hum of the air conditioner, and the faint scent of his cologne, subtle yet unmistakable, and she found him standing with papers in his hand, looking over them and then back at her, his expression shifting from concentration to something softer, something that made her chest tighten in ways she hadn't expected, and she felt her mind racing to find the right words, to ask what this meeting was about without seeming nervous, without betraying the swirl of emotions that made her stomach twist in anticipation, and Daniel cleared his throat, a small, almost hesitant sound that made her realize he too might be feeling an unfamiliar tension, and he finally spoke, his voice calm but with an edge of vulnerability that caught her off guard. Emily, I wanted to talk to you about something important, and the simple words hit her like a spark, igniting a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and fear, because she couldn't tell if this was professional or personal, a problem to solve or something deeper, and she took a step closer, seating herself in the chair he gestured to, aware of the faint hum of the city outside the window, the way the sunlight caught the dust in the air, and noticing the slight tremor in his hand as he set the papers down, a small, humanizing flaw that made him seem less like the confident, polished boss everyone else saw and more like a person who might be just as unsure as she felt, and as he shifted in his seat, she caught the nervous glance he gave to the closed door, as if checking that no one would interrupt them, and in that quiet moment, Emily realized that the office, the company, the daily grind she had always counted on for safety and structure, suddenly felt like a stage where something unexpected and unpredictable could happen, and she felt her heart beat faster, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities, none of which seemed to fit neatly into her routine life, yet all of which made her pulse race, because there was a subtle, unspoken weight in the air, a feeling that what was about to happen could change everything she thought she knew about her work, her life, and perhaps even about Daniel himself, and she found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to think about before, noting the way his eyes seemed to flicker with something beyond professional concern, a complexity that made her stomach flutter and her thoughts scatter, and Daniel finally looked directly at her, his gaze steady yet searching, making her feel exposed in a way that was thrilling and terrifying all at once, and he said again, I hope you can hear me out before you jump to conclusions, and Emily nodded, unsure of what she was agreeing to but feeling that whatever came next could not be ignored. And as she listened to the soft hum of the office, the distant ringing of phones, and the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway outside, she realized that her life, so carefully ordered and predictable, was teetering on the edge of something unexpected, something that might awaken feelings she had kept buried, and she felt a shiver of anticipation run through her as Daniel began to speak, each word measured, each pause deliberate, as if he too were aware of the fragile, charged atmosphere between them, and Emily's mind raced with questions and emotions, from curiosity to fear, from longing to a cautious excitement, because she sensed that in these few moments, in this small, sunlit office, the ordinary world she had always known might give way to something new, intimate, and profoundly stirring, and as Daniel looked down at the papers once more before meeting her eyes again, she caught the faintest hint of a smile, almost apologetic, almost tender, and she realized that whatever he was about to say, it would change her day, her perception of him, and perhaps even the course of her life in ways she could not yet understand, and she sat forward slightly, her hands clasped in her lap, heart thumping, aware of every sound, every movement, every subtle shift in expression, waiting for the moment when words would finally break the tension and reveal the truth behind this unexpected, nerve-wracking, yet oddly exhilarating summons to his office. As Emily settled into the chair, her palms slightly sweaty and her heartbeat still racing from the walk down the polished hallway, she tried to steady her mind, telling herself that whatever Daniel was about to say had to be professional, a project, a performance review, or some task that required her attention, but the way he avoided eye contact and fidgeted with the pen in his hand made her chest tighten and her thoughts spiral into uncertain territory, because there was something different in the air, something she had never felt during their interactions before, a quiet tension that wasn't about work, a subtle pull that made her aware of him in a completely new way, and as she glanced at his desk, noticing the neatly stacked papers, the small framed photo of what seemed like a family gathering, and the way sunlight glinted off the corner of his laptop, she realized how little she truly knew about him beyond the professional surface, and Daniel cleared his throat, soft but deliberate, finally meeting her eyes with a gaze that was hesitant yet searching, as if he were trying to measure her reaction before taking the next step, and Emily felt her stomach flutter as he said, "Emily, I've noticed how much effort and care you put into your work, not just the results but the thoughtfulness behind every decision," and the words made her blush despite herself, because praise from colleagues was common, but coming from him, it carried weight, significance, and something almost personal that she couldn't quite define, and she swallowed nervously, unsure whether to respond immediately or remain silent, letting the moment breathe, and Daniel continued, his voice low, almost fragile, "There's something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time, but I wasn't sure how, or if it was even appropriate, given everything," and Emily felt a jolt, a strange mixture of anticipation and fear, because his tone implied that whatever he was about to reveal was not just about deadlines or office responsibilities, it was something deeper, more intimate, a personal truth that had been quietly building beneath the surface of their professional lives, and she leaned slightly forward, heart thumping, unsure whether to brace herself or let the moment unfold naturally, and Daniel's fingers tapped lightly on the desk as if to steady himself, his eyes flickering toward the door before returning to her, and she caught a vulnerability there, a crack in the confident exterior she had always admired from afar, and it made her chest ache with a sudden, unexpected empathy, a desire to reach out, to understand, to connect, and the room seemed to shrink around them, filled with a charged silence that made every small sound, the tick of the clock, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant murmur of voices outside feel amplified, significant, as if the world itself was holding its breath along with them, and then Daniel spoke again, more softly, "I've felt a connection with you, one that goes beyond work, and I didn't know how to handle it, but I can't ignore it anymore." And Emily's heart skipped a beat, a warmth spreading through her that was both exhilarating and terrifying, because she had sensed it too, the small glances, the way he lingered in conversations just a moment longer than necessary, the quiet attentiveness that made her feel seen in a way few others had, but hearing him say it aloud made it real, tangible, and impossible to dismiss, and her mind raced with questions. How could this be possible? What would it mean for both of them? How could two people in such different positions navigate this delicate, fragile attraction without risking everything they had worked for? Yet amidst the storm of uncertainty, a tiny spark of hope ignited, whispering that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected moment was meant to be. And before she could form a coherent response, Daniel reached for a small envelope on his desk, his movements careful, almost reverent, as if the contents carried more weight than any document or contract he had ever handled, and he held it out to her, saying softly, "I didn't want to make things complicated, but I wanted you to have this," and Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it, her curiosity overcoming the nervousness that had gripped her, and inside was a simple, elegant pendant, delicate and understated, yet imbued with a sense of thoughtfulness and intimacy that words alone could not convey, and as she held it, turning it over in her hands, she realized the depth of his gesture, the courage it must have taken to express something so personal in such a professional setting, and she felt her chest tighten with emotion, a mixture of surprise, tenderness, and a burgeoning sense of longing that made her dizzy with possibility, and Daniel's eyes searched hers, seeking a response, a sign that she understood, that she felt even a fraction of what he had confessed, and Emily's mind was a whirlwind of sensations, the warmth of his gaze, the weight of the pendant, the sudden awareness of the closeness between them, the subtle scent of his cologne, and the quiet intimacy of the office that now seemed to exist outside of time, and she realized that in this single moment, the careful boundaries of their professional relationship had shifted, replaced by something unspoken, fragile, and profoundly stirring, and as she finally whispered, I don't know what to say, her voice barely audible, Daniel smiled, a gentle, almost relieved smile, and nodded, understanding the complexity of her emotions, the mixture of surprise, curiosity, and cautious excitement, and the air between them vibrated with potential, the promise of something new, something tender and heartfelt that neither of them had fully anticipated, and as Emily looked down at the pendant once more, feeling its weight in her hands, she realized that life at the firm, the routines she had relied on, the predictable cadence of her days, had already begun to change, subtly but irreversibly, because this moment, unexpected, delicate, and profoundly moving, had opened a door to emotions she had long kept hidden, and she felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with a quiet fear, knowing that the days to come would be shaped by this confession, this intimate, vulnerable revelation, and she took a deep breath, letting herself feel the intensity of the experience, the strange mix of professional caution and personal curiosity, the undeniable attraction and emotional resonance, and she understood that while nothing had yet happened beyond the exchange of words and a small, meaningful gift, the course of her relationship with Daniel, and perhaps her own understanding of herself, had shifted irrevocably, because in the quiet of that sunlit office, amidst the soft hums and distant echoes of the workplace, Emily had glimpsed a connection, fragile, tentative, yet powerful enough to make her heart race, her thoughts swirl, and her imagination run wild with the possibilities of what could come next, and as Daniel finally leaned back slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction, Emily realized that she too was standing at the edge of something new, something deeply emotional, romantic, and transformative, and though fear and uncertainty lingered at the edges of her mind, the undeniable pull between them, the warmth in his eyes, and the subtle, intimate gesture of the pendant had created a space where something extraordinary could begin, something that neither rules nor routines could contain, and as she left the office that day, her steps hesitant yet light, the pendant safely tucked into her bag, she felt the first flickers of hope and excitement, a quiet awareness that her life was no longer entirely her own, that it had been touched by an unexpected confession, a gesture of vulnerability and care, and that the days ahead would hold moments of tension, anticipation, longing, and perhaps even heartbreak, but also a profound potential for connection, for tenderness, and for an emotional journey that promised to change her in ways she could only begin to imagine, and she walked back to her desk with a strange mixture of exhilaration and apprehension, knowing that the office, her work, and Daniel himself would never feel the same again, that the careful, predictable rhythm of her life had been disrupted by a confession, by an acknowledgement of feelings long unspoken, and that in this subtle, delicate unfolding, she had glimpsed the beginning of something that could be beautiful, complicated, and unforgettable, and she carried that awareness in her chest, like a secret flame, fragile yet undeniably alive, as she returned to her routine, each keystroke and email now tinged with the memory of the moment, the pendant's weight in her hands, and the soft, searching eyes of Daniel, leaving her suspended between curiosity, hope, and a tender, burgeoning attraction that would guide the next steps of her heart and mind. Emily returned to her desk with her thoughts racing faster than her fingers could type. The office suddenly louder and quieter at the same time, every laugh from coworkers sounding distant while the memory of Daniel's voice stayed close, steady, and warm, and as the day moved on she tried to focus on tasks, emails, meetings, but the pendant in her bag felt like a quiet heartbeat reminding her that something real had shifted, something she could not unfeel, and when the afternoon sun dipped lower and the office lights hummed on, she sensed eyes on her and looked up to find Daniel standing at a polite distance, his expression careful yet open, as if he were giving her space while still wanting to be near, and he asked if she could stay a few minutes after work to finish a report together, a reasonable request that still made her pulse jump, and she nodded, telling herself to stay calm, to keep this simple, professional, safe. Yet when the office slowly emptied and the sounds softened to the whir of computers and the distant cleaning crew, the quiet felt heavier, charged with everything unsaid, and they sat across from each other reviewing figures, their shoulders tense, their words clipped, both aware of how close they were without touching, and Emily noticed how Daniel listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered beyond the page, and when he smiled at a suggestion she made, the smile reached his eyes, warm and grateful, and it made her chest ache in a way that surprised her, because she had spent years guarding her heart, choosing stability over risk, and now risk had quietly chosen her, and as they wrapped up the work he hesitated, fingers resting on the desk, and said he wanted to be honest, that he respected her too much to make her uncomfortable, that he understood the balance they had to protect, and Emily felt a strange relief mixed with longing, because his care made the situation both safer and harder, and she found herself admitting that she was confused but not unhappy, cautious but curious, and the honesty between them felt like a bridge forming, fragile but real, and as they talked, not about work but about small things, favorite books, late-night walks, moments when life surprised them, Emily saw a different side of him, less polished, more human, a man who carried responsibility quietly and sometimes felt alone at the top, and she shared pieces of herself too, her love for simple routines, her fear of disappointment, her hope for something meaningful, and the connection deepened not through grand gestures but through shared understanding, through pauses that felt comfortable instead of awkward. And when he asked if she would be open to getting to know each other slowly, carefully, outside the office, she felt her breath catch, the word yes hovering on her lips like a fragile promise, but before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a message from a coworker, hinting at office rumors, small whispers that suddenly felt loud and dangerous, and fear rushed in, reminding her of consequences, of how quickly warmth could turn cold, and she stood, pacing slightly, explaining her worry, her need to protect her work and her heart, and Daniel listened without interrupting, his face serious, accepting, and he told her he would follow her lead, that nothing mattered more than her comfort and trust, and that patience was something he could offer, and the respect in his words grounded her, slowed her racing thoughts, and she realized this was not about a sudden spark alone but about choice, about two people deciding how to move forward with care, and she agreed to take time, to let things unfold naturally. And the relief in his smile was soft and genuine, and as they left the office together, walking out into the cool evening air, the city lights flickering on, Emily felt lighter, as if she had set down a heavy weight without losing the warmth she carried, and over the following days they settled into a new rhythm, subtle and careful, shared glances that felt supportive rather than secretive, brief conversations that carried depth beneath their simplicity, and Emily noticed how Daniel gave her space in meetings, how he encouraged her ideas publicly without singling her out, how he treated her with the same fairness as everyone else, and it built trust, steady and reassuring. And outside of work they exchanged messages that were thoughtful and gentle, learning each other's worlds one detail at a time, and Emily found herself smiling more, sleeping better, feeling seen without feeling exposed, yet beneath the calm there was tension, the kind that comes from wanting more but choosing patience. And one evening as they met for coffee in a quiet place far from the office, Daniel shared his fears of failing people he cared about, of letting ambition overshadow humanity, and Emily understood, because she too feared losing herself in expectations, and the shared vulnerability felt like a deepening bond, and as they sat across from each other, hands close but not touching, the unspoken understanding felt louder than words, and Emily realized that attraction was no longer the center, connection was, and it scared her because connection meant something could be lost. And just as she began to feel steady in this new balance, a shift came, sudden and sharp, when the company announced a major restructuring, bringing new leadership, new scrutiny, and a new set of eyes that looked closely at every interaction. And whispers grew louder, glances sharper, and Emily felt the pressure tighten around her chest, knowing that even innocent moments could be misunderstood, and she saw the strain on Daniel too, the way his jaw tightened, the way his focus sharpened, and they spoke less openly at work, retreating into professionalism, and the distance, though necessary, hurt more than she expected, and one night she questioned whether this was worth it, whether protecting everything meant giving up something meaningful before it could truly begin, and when she voiced this fear to Daniel, he didn't dismiss it, he acknowledged it, telling her that sometimes timing was the hardest test, and that he would not ask her to sacrifice her peace for his feelings, and the maturity in his words made her heart ache with affection. And as the days passed, Emily faced a decision whether to pursue a promotion that would move her to another department, creating distance but safety, or to stay where she was, close yet constrained, and the choice weighed on her, because it felt like choosing between security and possibility, and when she finally told Daniel about the offer, she expected disappointment, but instead he smiled with pride, telling her she deserved growth, telling her he would support her choice no matter what it meant for them, and the selflessness of that moment struck her deeply, because it showed love without demand, and Emily realized that whatever happened next, whatever shape their story took, it was already changing her, teaching her courage, honesty, and the value of being seen and respected, and as she stood at the edge of a new chapter, unsure of the outcome but aware of her own strength, she felt the tension of anticipation settle into determination, knowing that the path ahead would test both her heart and her resolve. And as she walked away from the office that evening, the city lights reflecting in the glass, she understood that the surprise was no longer the confession or the connection, but the way it had awakened her to her own desires, her own worth, and the quiet power of choosing with intention, leaving her poised on the brink of a decision that would define not just her relationship with Daniel, but the direction of her life itself. Emily felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension as the days passed, knowing that her connection with Daniel had grown from a quiet spark into something deeper, a subtle, almost imperceptible bond that existed in glances, small gestures, and the shared understanding of unspoken words, and now, standing outside the office after hours, the city around her bathed in golden light, she could feel the weight of what had begun, tender and fragile yet undeniable, pulsing with possibility. And when Daniel appeared, walking toward her with the same careful steps, his face soft but serious, she felt her heart leap, a fluttering sensation that had become familiar and yet never less thrilling, and as he reached her, he greeted her with a gentle smile, the kind that carried reassurance, admiration, and a quiet longing all at once, and she noticed the slight nervousness in his stance, the way his fingers twitched at his sides, evidence that he too was feeling the tension and anticipation that made this moment feel like a turning point. And together they began to walk down the quiet streets, their conversation light at first, casual, speaking of projects, weather, and the mundane, but underneath each word lingered a shared awareness, a closeness that made ordinary topics feel charged, and Emily felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest, a comforting yet electrifying sensation that told her this connection was becoming more than a fleeting office interaction. It was something that could grow, mature, and deepen if nurtured carefully, and as they approached a small, cozy cafe tucked into a corner, Daniel suggested they sit, and Emily agreed, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness, aware that this was a moment outside the constraints of their professional lives, a space where they could explore the feelings that had quietly developed over weeks, and as they settled into the booth, the soft hum of the cafe enveloping them, she noticed the way his eyes lingered on hers, patient, attentive, the slight tilt of his head conveying interest and care, and she felt her lips curl into a small, shy smile, realizing how much she had come to value these moments, small as they were, because they carried authenticity and intimacy without pressure, and Daniel spoke first, in a tone soft but sincere, expressing how he had thought about this connection constantly, about how difficult it had been to balance his feelings with responsibility, about the fear of losing her trust or making her uncomfortable, and Emily listened, heart swelling, recognizing the honesty and vulnerability in his words, knowing that true affection was not just in grand gestures but in the careful, deliberate respect he showed her, and when she responded, her own voice trembling slightly, she spoke of her confusion, her cautious excitement, the fear of risk mingling with the hope that something meaningful could develop, and the exchange of feelings was gentle, careful, a dance of words and silences that built trust as much as intimacy. And as the sun set outside the cafe window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the pendant she had received in his office, now on a delicate chain, and held it out for her to see, reminding her that this connection had begun with a gesture of thoughtfulness and courage, and Emily felt a surge of emotion, realizing that this small object symbolized trust, consideration, and the opening of hearts, and she accepted it, letting it rest against her chest as a tangible reminder of the delicate bond they were nurturing, and the moment felt suspended in time, both of them aware of the significance, the fragility, and the potential of what lay ahead, and they spoke of boundaries, of patience, of the care required to maintain professionalism while exploring personal feelings, and each word, though measured, carried layers of understanding and affection, and Emily felt herself growing more confident, more willing to trust the process, to allow herself to experience the warmth, the comfort, and the excitement that came from being seen and respected, and as the evening grew darker, they walked slowly back through the quiet streets, occasionally brushing hands in moments that felt accidental yet deliberate, and the city lights reflected in their eyes like tiny sparks, illuminating the mixture of longing, caution, and hope that defined their connection, and Emily realized that attraction alone was no longer enough, that what mattered most was the shared commitment to honesty, understanding, and mutual care, and she felt a deep gratitude for Daniel's presence, his patience, and his willingness to allow things to unfold naturally, and as they reached the entrance to her apartment building, she paused, aware of the bittersweet edge of parting, and Daniel looked at her, expression gentle but intent, and asked if she would like to meet again soon, to continue exploring what had begun, and Emily nodded, a soft smile spreading across her face, feeling a flutter of anticipation that was now tempered with trust, and as she entered the building, she reflected on the journey of the past weeks, from the first private meeting in the office, the confession of feelings, the tender exchanges of thoughtfulness, to the careful exploration of emotions outside the office, and she felt a sense of wonder at how something so delicate had taken root, a connection that was emotional, romantic, dramatic, and profoundly moving without needing grand gestures or explicit declarations, and she realized that love, in its truest form, often began in quiet, understated moments, nurtured by respect, patience, and mutual vulnerability, and as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, the pendant resting against her heart, she thought of Daniel, of his careful words, his unwavering respect, and the way he had allowed her to feel safe while acknowledging the spark between them, and she understood that the future was uncertain, that challenges would come in the form of office scrutiny, rumors, and the delicate balance between personal desire and professional responsibility. But she also knew that this experience had awakened something deep within her, a capacity for trust, courage, and emotional honesty that she had long kept hidden, and as she closed her door behind her, the soft click echoing in the quiet apartment, she allowed herself to feel the full range of emotions that had been building, the thrill of attraction, the warmth of connection, the cautious hope of new beginnings, and the tender longing that comes from realizing that someone sees you completely and still chooses to care. And as she set the pendant down on her bedside table, she felt a quiet determination to navigate this delicate path with honesty and grace, to allow the story between them to unfold with patience and understanding, and to cherish the subtle, profound moments that marked the beginning of what could become a deep and meaningful relationship. And as night fell, Emily lay awake, thoughts of Daniel weaving through her mind like threads of light, imagining future conversations, small adventures, shared laughter, quiet moments of connection, and even the challenges that would inevitably test their bond, and she understood that love was never simple, that it required courage, care, and attention, and that this tender beginning, delicate yet potent, was a gift she would honor and nurture, allowing it to grow slowly, thoughtfully, and beautifully, until the next meeting, the next word, the next shared moment added another layer to the story that had begun unexpectedly, quietly, but now promised to transform their lives in ways both thrilling and deeply fulfilling, leaving her with a sense of hope, longing, and the undeniable realization that sometimes the most profound love stories begin not with fireworks or declarations but with small gestures, honest words, and the willingness to see someone fully, to respect them, and to allow feelings to blossom in their own time. And Emily drifted to sleep that night with a smile on her lips, the pendant resting against her chest as a quiet emblem of the journey that had begun and the tender, heartfelt connection that would continue to shape her days, her heart, and the unfolding story of love, trust, and emotional intimacy that had taken root in ways she never expected but would forever cherish.